Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the Virtual Velo Podcast, the show that bridges the gap between athlete and avatar, keeping it real in the world of cycling esports. Well, joining me, Emma Martin, is my co-host Chris Schwenker, and today we're heading to Singapore. It's a small island nation, densely packed, highly urban, and not the first place most people would point to when talking about cycling hotbeds. But if you scratch beneath the surface, there's a growing cycling scene there, supported by an expanding virtual cycling initiative.
Indeed, Emma. Singapore feels like one of those places where the constraints of necessity sharpen the creativity. Space is limited, the roads are busy, and the pathway to elite cycling, or any riding, is not a smooth road. But that's what makes virtual cycling such an intriguing fit. It lowers barriers, creates structure where geography would otherwise get in the way, and gives riders a place to train, race, and belong. And that's exactly why what our guest and his team have created is so fascinating to me.
Well, our guest is Yi Jun, co-founder, of Virtual Cycling Singapore, a program built around making virtual cycling fun, fair, and accessible, whilst also using it as a gateway to high performance and community connection. VSG runs out of a studio space at Ascend Fitness in central Singapore, has partnerships with the Singapore Cycling Federation, and now hosts programming ranging from inter-schools competition to national level esports events. And boy, am I looking forward to this conversation. Yi Jun, the founder of Virtual Cycling Singapore, welcome to the Virtual Velo Podcast.
Hi Emma, hi Chris. Nice to meet you both and really excited to share about what we are doing here in the world of virtual cycling.
Yes, and I'm hoping our listeners are too, because we've been following you, Chris and I, for some time and really keeping an eye on what's going on, and it's going to be great to have that out there and spread that story a little more. Let's start by painting a bit of a picture, shall we? So Singapore is an island nation near the equator, for those people who are less sure of their geography, with over 6 million people packed into about 285. That makes it one of the most densely populated countries in the world, with over 21,000 people per square mile. Now, thinking about that, that poses some unique challenges. With that context in mind, what is the general cycling experience in Singapore like? Infrastructure, cycling clubs, group rides, what actually is cycling like in Singapore?
So in Singapore itself, obviously we need somewhere to cycle. So the government has been quite supportive by building dedicated cycling paths or cycling areas within Singapore where you can actually cycle up to maybe, let's say, 15 kilometers non-stop. But it's really, really hard to actually hit a 40 km distance without having to stop at a traffic light. So imagine that you are cycling somewhere in, let's say, downtown New York. That would be how you'll be cycling in Singapore within most of Singapore itself. But of course, we do still have some areas where we have actually long uninterrupted routes, but that would probably go up to, I guess, 10 kilometers, or in your case, 16 miles in that case.
So I took a look at pro cycling stats before we had this conversation just to do some research. And there are some pro riders from Singapore, but there aren't that many. Singapore obviously doesn't have a strong cycling pedigree. What opportunities are available for more competitive riders? Are there any races? What are the prospects for a talented young rider that maybe wants to give it a go as a pro?
So Chris, I think you're very right. So maybe let me address on the point about the reason why we don't really have much pro cyclists. I think, to be honest, a performance of a country in the sport depends very much on the infrastructure that is available. In the case of cycling, Singapore, we don't really have mountains to climb. Our highest hill, it's about maybe, I guess, 200 feet to 300 feet or so that we can actually climb up. So with that in mind, and our population, we mainly do office jobs, meaning that everyone will have a job somewhat because Singapore itself is the business hub of Southeast Asia, or rather most of Asia Pacific actually. So it's actually not enticing, to be honest, to actually go into the pathway of a professional cyclist compared to, let's say, a banker or a data engineer, etc. But even amidst all this, I think there are still actually opportunities and pathway. So we have actually teamed up with World Tour teams. So for example, the Singapore Cycling Federation, which is the federation that actually governs cycling activities within Singapore, has bridged our national youth riders to the movie star team, and they did a training camp actually back in Spain in I think January to February this year. So actually, we are actually creating opportunities with Conti teams to actually go abroad and train, and not only European continental team, but also Asian teams as well. I think we'll get there eventually, and I hope that actually virtual cycling can be the pathway to identify young talents in Singapore and push them towards that competitive path.
So needless to say, if you do want to go down that path, you're not training on the island. You have to travel, whether it be by boat or by plane, getting somewhere where the terrain and the infrastructure is more conducive to cycling then.
Yes, that's exactly the point. So we had a couple of continental team riders, and what they did was simply they signed themselves with a Conti team that is based out of Singapore, meaning somewhere, let's say in Malaysia or in Australia, and they spend 75% of their time training abroad. And also at the same time, the level of competition that regional competitions are held outside Singapore are way higher, and they produce a conducive environment for those riders to actually thrive in. So going abroad, yes, Chris' point is where success can be found actually.
With all these challenges in mind, the limitations, the hurdles, did that factor into your inspiration for Virtual Cycling Singapore?
Yes. So I think virtual cycling itself. Okay, maybe let me share a bit of why did we actually started virtual cycling. So back then, during COVID, I started cycling more, and then I got enlisted in the national training squad. And during that phase, I was exposed to virtual cycling, and I did pretty well in that. And what happened then was I became a dad, and I had to step down from training. And the Cycling Federation actually asked me, "Hey, Yi Jun, do you want to set up an esports cycling academy so that when 2029 Southeast Asian Games is being held at Singapore, we can actually have that competition and perhaps podium in that competition?" Me and two other co-founders, we said, okay, yes, I think it's a plausible idea. That's something that we can actually achieve. And that's how we started Virtual Cycling SG, to actually create pathway for students or younger athletes and to bridge them to the professional or competitive pathway that is slightly further away from where they are now.
Tell us a little bit more. I mean, you've started there to unpick what Virtual Cycling Singapore is. Tell us a little bit more about what it is, the programs, the facility, the mission.
So actually, Virtual Cycling Singapore itself, we actually revolve around 4 pillars actually. So the first one is competitions. Our main goal is to create as many virtual cycling competitions in Singapore and perhaps also in Southeast Asia in the next 1 to 2 years. And we have been doing this for 2 years running. The second is a virtual cycling academy. So started last year, we actually created 6 months boot camps for kids who are keen to actually try out cycling or virtual cycling. And after these 6 months, they can actually stay with us, or they can progress on to another local club team where they can then further pursue their competitive journey in cycling. And number 3 is where we actually have virtual cycling competitions, programs for corporates and schools, and that's where we actually try to promote virtual cycling. So that's our third pillar, businesses and schools. And the very last pillar itself is the rest of the ecosystem, which is other stakeholders, like for example, the physiotherapies, like maybe bicycle shops, and we try to engage them, and we try and create more opportunities to have cycling events within this small island nation of Singapore itself.
Yeah, it really seems like an inclusive program. And, like Emma said, we've been following you for a really long time, and we see the polished end product of it, right? We see what's on socials. We see these videos, which are actually quite compelling, I must say. It seems like you guys have a lot of fun in that studio of yours. But there's got to be a day-to-day grind that goes on. So tell me about your responsibilities from day to day. Like, is this your full-time job? What help do you have? And what does it take to run a program that's as extensive, as inclusive as yours?
Sure. So Chris, my day job, actually I have a day job. I work in Deloitte Consulting. So to be honest, the day job itself is quite intensive. I have to work quite long hours because as business consultants, we work on projects, and these projects are often time crunched. But when I have the free time outside working, I do spend a lot actually in investing into this virtual cycling initiative. And we do actually have a studio, but at the moment we don't run classes. It's something like by appointment basis, and kind of like let's say if you would like to train with us, we then onboard you and you come at your own time. So it's not really open to public at the moment. We generally have staff who are actually kids from the cycling academy to come and work part-time. So what happens is that in exchange for the free training program for the cycling training opportunity in Singapore abroad, they then contribute their time to make this to be the volunteers or to be the staff that actually run the operations. And when I say operations, like what I mentioned earlier, they are mainly corporate or school events or competitions that we actually run. So because of this virtual cycling academy that supports the whole operations, we don't have to fork out so much money financially to actually run the operational cost of the studio itself. So all in all, in summary, I probably give instructions to the interns or the part-time staff, and they will actually execute the instructions to make sure the whole thing is up and running.
Yeah, it is. I'm just sort of pausing there because it's a really interesting circular model, isn't it? In terms of the contribution from the potential athletes and people involved themselves, and then giving back into, and that cyclical model is a lovely one to actually hear.
Yeah, so actually on that, Emma, the reason why I wanted that movement is ultimately my end goal is I may be around, I may not be around, but if that moment comes when I'm no longer around because of whatsoever reason, there will be people that will actually take over this. And when I say people, they are passionate people, not just anyone that is doing it for the sake of doing. So hopefully my goal is that if I can produce like maybe 3 to 5 versions of myself in the younger academy, and in the future, these 3 to 5 younger riders will then go on to produce 3 to 5 other younger riders each. It will be like a kind of a ripple effect where we can actually have a group of passionate people in 10 to 20 years, which can then help to elevate the whole Singapore cycling community and the competition level itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way of doing things. It makes it really interesting listening to you, actually, because, that initial conversation with Singapore Cycling about, can you do this for the South Asian Games in 2029 to produce an athlete? Is the project still for that original sort of aspiring racer or getting that end goal, or has the project become wider in terms of who this is for?
So the short answer is yes. So we are driven by our objective, and we only have key 2 objectives within virtual cycling Singapore itself, which is number 1, to ensure that we are able to host or make virtual cycling a sport within the Southeast Asian Games in 2029. And number 2, if it becomes an actual sport within the games, we then have the people and the riders to actually be able to win and stand on the podium on behalf of Singapore. So that is still the objective every day. But as we reach and as we work towards the objective, we realize that we are actually accomplishing a lot of other side quests. And to give you an example, in order to make virtual cycling a known sport within Southeast Asian game, we actually have to do a lot of promotion, public awareness, etc. And we have begun to actually have community events, community initiative where we run competitions for free within different housing district within Singapore itself. And the benefit of that was as more people start seeing this, and I think now after doing this for 2 years, the government actually recognized us and they see that this is actually something potential that the whole Singapore can actually participate, because in Singapore and in Southeast Asia in general, there's aging population, health is well. With that kind of notion going on, I think being healthier and being active aging is actually very important concept to the Singapore government. And I think a lot of the Singapore government agencies are starting to recognize that, and thereby somewhat making the importance of the cycling itself rise, making it more important in the Singapore society itself.
Interesting. So I was going to ask you, there's that concept, isn't there? The aspiring racer, the amateur cyclist, the developing junior. But actually, it sounds as though with the sort of snowball effect that you could well be seeing, there's also the recreational fitness enthusiast and a public health agenda as well. You could see it, like those waves you were talking about.
Correct. Exactly.
And it's what I'm also hearing now is that as of now, virtual cycling isn't in the Southeastern Asian Games. Is that correct?
It is not. It is not yet at the moment.
So you not only have to cultivate athletes that could potentially compete in these games, you also have to convince the government and the public that it's worthwhile doing.
Yes, exactly. So I think the challenge of that, maybe to the first point on getting the government, I'm quite confident of convincing the Singapore government to participate and roll this out. But I think the trouble we are actually, not trouble, but rather the uphill challenge will be to convince the neighboring countries to participate and believe in virtual cycling. I think, to be honest, a virtual setup is, as you all know, is relatively expensive. The cost doesn't go lower just because we are in Southeast Asia. The cost is equally as expensive. And I think road cycling is still the preferred way of training to a lot of the national cycling teams in the other countries in Southeast Asia. So to actually convince everyone to invest in a set, not only one, but in a set of standardized, trusted cycling trainers, and then have the competitions remotely, I think that will be a challenge, and it will take some time for us to actually convince all the neighboring countries. But we are getting there. I think we have seen benefits where we collaborate with the other cycling federations, and potentially we could sponsor or pass them over the bikes that we are using. And then because with the bikes that are free now, they can then, and all the bikes are standardized, obviously, and then we can all actually do this in a fair and transparent manner. I think that's something that we are working towards too. Our main goal is to actually host a Southeast Asian level kind of competition, whether we fly the athletes from neighboring countries into Singapore or we do it remotely. But it is in our calendar to actually do one race at the end of 2026.
That's extremely exciting. Now, would you say that Singapore has a fairly strong gaming culture, like video gaming culture, and the region in general?
Yes. So I think Singapore itself, in certain games like let's say Mobile Legend, I think we are amongst Asia top 5, to be honest. And Asia, I mean Asia and New Zealand, Australia, so Asia Pacific as a whole. So the gaming culture is actually very, very strong in Singapore. But at the moment, the connection between virtual sports, meaning virtual taekwondo, virtual golf, or even those F1 simulator, is not connected at the moment with the other esports, where like Mobile Legend, League of Legend, etc., Dota. These two areas are not that connected yet, and we hope to see some synergy in the future because ideally we would like to tap on the audiences. Yeah. So I think our main goal is actually to tap on these competitions, these esports gaming events, to actually bring virtual cycling inside and to make it more spectator friendly. I think that's our ultimate dream and our ultimate goal.
So the Southeast Asian Games is a combination of outdoor physical sports and esports. And within that esports, there's virtual physical sports like virtual cycling, and also other more traditional esports like League of Legends and Call of Duty. So the full gamut can be in the games, but the program and which sports they will be are yet to be decided.
Exactly. And to be honest, I think usually the games are decided 1 to 2 years in advance. So it means that if we want to make it a sport in 2029, we will have to act upon it before. So this gives us about less than 2 years to actually materialize all this.
So let's just talk a little. One of the things I have loved following and watching, and I was like so excited to see the first time I saw it pop up on your socials, was your school-based program. Because for me, I just think that's just a missed opportunity, sort of globally, when you think you've got a group of young adults, teenagers, who are playing, computer games and gaming and have that pretty much built into their generation at the moment. The concept of taking virtual cycling into schools just sort of seems like something you would expect to happen much more than it does. So tell us about the Virtual Academy and the school-based programs that you've got. Is it just working with a single school or multiple schools? How does all that work?
So I think in Singapore itself, because like earlier Chris mentioned, the land mass is actually not very huge. So to give you an idea of how small Singapore is, if you go from one end, which is the east, to the other end, which is the west, it will take you no more than 60 minutes by car. So that's how small Singapore is. And because of this small landmass, we are actually able to go to schools and bring our bikes to school and carry out the virtual cycling event relatively easily. So what we have been doing is either the schools have been inviting us because they needed something to fill up their curriculum, or it's because we proactively reach out and they see the opportunity to actually engage their students with another kind of sport that they have not tried it before. So I think we were either invited or we actively reach out. But I think beyond those experiential programs, we want to make it more sustainable. So we have actually, for example, started programs with schools to actually have more contact points within the year. Like for example, it's a 4-month program where we help them run some physical cycling classes for a selected group of students who are interested. And at the end of the 4 months, if these students are actually interested, they can then move on and go to the National Youth Development Squad or other competitive pathway. So this is something that we have been doing more actively. And I think back to your point, Emma, I think the kids love it. As long as the distances are not too long, maybe a 5 km or a 6 km sprint, they are very excited and very happy and energetic to actually come and compete. And kids, they are competitive. So they really enjoy this whole process of doing this format. And I think here I have to give a shout out to actually Training Peaks Virtual. So we have been using Training Peaks Virtual for a while. I think the ability to actually create different format like points race, elimination race has actually made the whole virtual cycling competition and games so gamified that the kids really, really love it when they come and play with it. So this is often the feedback that I've gotten with the kids that we have interacted over the past 2 years.
And does that work in a similar way with your corporate environment?
So for corporate itself, I think we are more, it will be more dependent on what the corporate need. So we have done a couple of corporate events for example, Johnson & Johnson, Singapore Airlines. None of the corporate events are similar to each other. So for example, Johnson & Johnson, they wanted a charity event where employees come and clock, and at the end of the day, the department with the longer distance will actually win the competition, and all this distance will be converted to donations. For example, it could be 1 mile, could be $1 or something like that. And for Singapore Airlines, we did something different where they actually come and have 3 to 4 minutes to compete on a leaderboard to fight for the best 1 km, which is slightly less than a mile timing, and see whether are they the best male or best female. So I think different corporates have actually different experiences, and I think the goal there is really more about corporate bonding or the employees' welfare. So it's very, very different in terms of the agenda as compared to the school programs.
Like I could vision someone listening to this and saying, that idea is a great idea. We want to bring it to here or whatever country they happen to be listening from, but they realize that there is a cost to it. Right. There must be some ways that you're monetizing things. So can you give us a bit of an explanation of how you're doing that? And also tell us about the bike pass that you have as well.
At the moment, because I have a day job, I think if I do this full time, I might be more commercially driven, to be honest. But because I have a day job and don't want to put too much pressure on myself as well as the staff that are working with us, in which they are mainly the kids from the Virtual Cycling Academy, the operating model that we have now is primarily cost recovery. So to give an example, we are organizing, if you go to our website, we are organizing a physical criterion race in the Central Business District area in Singapore on the 11th of April. I think the ticket price we are charging is 29 Singapore dollars, which is less than 24 US dollars. This amount of ticket will be then used to actually cover the cost of, let's say, renting the ambulance for the day, printing the number beeps, getting the barriers to actually barricade the whole route. So most of our events, we are able to recover the costs simply from ticket prices. But in the long term, I think what we hope to achieve is to be able to create an intellectual property that belongs to us, in which we can then either franchise or eventually sell it off to a larger or bigger cycling company. So this is still work in progress, but it will be some sort of franchise idea, and that will be some time to come, probably before the 2029 Southeast Asian Games.
So are those your sort of, I suppose there's multiple goals here. That aspiration in terms of franchising the model or in terms of selling off the model, that has to be part and parcel of your longer term or even shorter term goal program if it is till that 2020, before that 2029 period. But if you are, what are the goals of Virtual Cycling Singapore, short term or long term? What would be the key ones you would focus on?
So short terms obviously will be to, number one, make virtual cycling actual competitive games within the Southeast Asian Games in 2029, and number two, to actually win it. And long term wise, we hope that the Virtual Cycling Academy can then eventually gradually evolve into a continental team. So the last time Singapore had a continental team was actually, I think, about maybe almost a decade ago or more than a decade ago. And since then, because of the lack of sponsors, the lack of fund, we haven't been able to get that going. I hope to be able to use that as a foundation to actually create a continental team, and this continental team can then incentivize or actually motivate the younger riders to have something to look forward to if they wish to pursue the competitive pathway. And I think going longer term forward, I don't know whether am I being too ambitious here, but I want to put Singapore's name in the global arena in virtual cycling, or at least in virtual sports itself. So my goal is that by 2030, Singapore will be a leader in terms of ideas, intellectual properties, or even having the game itself in the virtual sport especially virtual cycling arena, in the whole global world. So I think that's more of the long-term goal. I think it's a stretch goal. Hopefully we can get there one day.
I love your ambition, Yi. I really do. It's extremely refreshing. And I know that you probably couldn't achieve any of this without the support of the Federation. Like when you started the conversation by saying that the Federation came to you, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never heard anyone say that before. So the majority, I would say 99% of the federations, they see cycling esports as just an afterthought in most respects. Now, tell us more about the way that the Federation supports you. Actually, I know that you had a national championships. Well, what is the plan as far as the Federation? Do they want to use you as a talent identification pathway, or is it strictly to build out the cycling esports facet of the Federation?
So I think in Singapore itself, the Cycling Federation's roles and responsibilities is to elevate the position of cycling as a sport within other sports in Singapore. And because of that, they have been actually pushing for infrastructure. Like we just had a BMX pump track that was open last year in December. We hopefully will have a velodrome, an outdoor velodrome soon in Singapore itself. And because of that, that is on top of their daily task of bringing Singapore athletes to compete elsewhere. Like I think in 5 days' time, there'll be the track, the World Championship in Manila, Philippines, and that's where the coaches will then bring the athletes there to compete. So I think they already have a lot of tasks to do. So in terms of virtual cycling itself, where the Singapore Cycling Federation actually help us a lot is not really in the operations, but more of linking us and connecting us to the correct people. So now in Singapore, we have 2 studios. One is the one that Emma mentioned, which is in Ascend Fitness within the central area in Singapore. We actually then have now a new studio, which we actually opened last month, but it's still in the beta testing phase. And that studio and the first studio, these 2 studios, they're actually kind of sponsored. The rents are actually sponsored by friends of the Singapore Cycling Federation. And without the Cycling Federation, we are unable to actually get to the network of such people. And beyond this, beyond the renter and the venue, they had connected us to many, many different other people who then can help us achieve our final goal of making the games at 2029. So I think we are very thankful to the Singapore Cycling Federation in the support that they have given us so far, not only to connect us to the people, but as well as to bring the athletes to come to our events.
That 2029 date is obviously really crucial, but can I just ask another associated question? Do you have aspirations to qualify a rider for the Esports World Championships?
Yes. So I think, to be honest, I'll be upfront and blunt about this. There's still some gap between the physical fitness of a Singaporean rider, be it male or female, compared to the best of Asia itself. So I think we have actually tried and we have sent our riders to the My Whoosh semi-finals World Champs last year, as well as the year before in 2024. I think every year we are improving, but we are not improving fast enough to put us at the top of Asia. But hopefully one day, we can get there. And that's where we actually think that by having competitive pathway in talent identification, and as well as the continental team, will then help to speed up this process of getting the strongest and best athletes, and then to put them on the world stage to then compete on behalf of Singapore. I think what we are lacking now, to be honest, is the lack of specialization in esports. Because if you really look at the other esports cyclists in the other performing nation, most of them, or actually 80%, they focus fully and solely on cycling esports. But that's not really the case in Singapore. I think in Singapore, our best cyclists are actually either road cyclists or track cyclists who spend 80% of their time outside. So it's really hard to convince them to then come and focus on cycling esports, because this esports cycling as well as the actual road cycling, as you both know, it's very, very different. The tactics, the physical requirements, they are very, very different when it comes to these both.
So that level of inter-country competition to develop your athletes would be really welcomed then.
Exactly. So I think Singaporeans, after having many competitions in Singapore for the past 2 years, they are starting to get kind of bored by it. I think they want to seek some more exciting challenges abroad. And I think that's where we are actually trying to bridge riders from other countries to either join our virtual cycling SG competitions, or we have a collaboration where it could be Singapore versus another country. I think in terms of youth, the side, we are quite successful. So we have been running and intra-Asia kind of a competition for the past 2 years. In 2024, we started with us having some youth, Singaporean youth, fighting against the youth in Hong Kong. And last year, we expanded that to Malaysia as well as Thailand. So I think we are gaining some tractions in terms of youth kind of intra-Asia kind of competition. But for adults-wise, I think that will take a bit of time and take a bit of convincing of the other cycling federation to then follow suit in what we are doing.
You spoke about those connections, and you also spoke earlier about cloning yourself. Have you thought about cloning these centers and making those connections in other regions and other countries? You're obviously extremely successful, and the model is been tested over several years. Have you had any conversations with other federations about implementing what you're doing in other Southeast Asian countries?
The answer yes and no. So maybe Chris, let me tell you what I mean, this is my opinion, I could be wrong. I think why we are so successful is because the people running this, including myself, they are very, very passionate, like the both of you, towards cycling esports. To be honest, it's really, really hard to find passionate people, especially towards cycling esports, even in Singapore. And I think we have been trying to find the right partners abroad. And our stance has always to be that we will not set up a similar setup abroad, even as a business, unless we find the correct partners with the correct character, the correct aptitude, the correct passion, or even more passion than us for cycling sport. We won't do that unless we find a suitable partner. So I think we have ideas, and at the moment it's actually plausible to have and clone our cycling business abroad, but we want it to be something that is sustainable and loved by everyone. I think at the end of the day, I mean, commercial profit is one thing. I hope that whoever comes to our studio, like I think you mentioned about the bike pass earlier, I hope whoever who come to the bike pass session to actually try out the studio and even try out our competition, love it, and they keep coming for it. I think that's our main goal. Commercial is second, and customers are always first. I think that's our philosophy.
Every time we get towards the closing segments of the Virtual Velo podcast, the questions start to get bigger and bigger again. And we're going to start to sort of do that because I think you've given us a really nice picture of where you would like the goals and the short, medium and long term or even aspirational goals of Virtual Cycling Singapore to be. How do you envisage the actual landscape that is positioned in? Where do you see virtual cycling or competitive cycling esports going itself in the bigger picture over the next 5 or 10 years?
I think, to be fair, I can only speak for Asia, as I mean, generally Southeast Asia as well, but maybe not beyond. I think culture plays a huge role in terms of determining how esports cycling actually develop on, and any other sport, the local culture actually plays a huge part in it. I think within Asia Pacific itself, I think if we could gamify the virtual cycling competition and allow for legal betting to some extent, I think that will help to boost the spectatorship as well as the viewership towards virtual cycling itself. And I think one thing that my Whoosh has been doing very well is they have been coming up with very, very interesting format. Like last year, they did the elimination hill climb where there's a red line that's actually climbing up towards everyone and creeping up towards everyone. And once the red line hits you, you then get eliminated from the game. I think we need more this sort of short, spectator-friendly competition style where you can bring everyone together, including the competitors and spectators, to actually fight it out, to then increase the brand, increase the viewership of virtual cycling. To be honest, quite positive, quite excited. Virtual cycling is not new in Southeast Asia. We have done it since COVID, since the time of Zwift. But I think it's the new time to actually move towards newer competitions. It's a new era to actually try out new formats and to see how far we can then push this into being a more spectator excited kind of sport in the future.
I laugh because Emma and I have had this debate before, but I'm on your side. I think that if we figured out a way to infuse betting into virtual cycling, that it would explode. It would really put gasoline on the fire. But there are a boatload of infrastructure and other issues that we would have to take care of before that. But just one final big picture question for you, Yi, because the passion really does come through. I'm looking at you and you're smiling when we ask you these questions, not only about the program itself and the centers, because you obviously created that and you're extremely proud of it, but you had the passion before. Why are you passionate about virtual cycling? What is it about cycling esports that really excites you? Why have you devoted all of your free time, which is obviously very limited and valuable to you, to this initiative?
I think, Chris, To be honest, it was a particular moment previously. So maybe let me elaborate a bit more on that. So when I was still part of the national training team in Singapore, we had to participate in a competition that was organized by the Taiwan Cycling Federation. So it was an online race. We just have to dial in. They were using their own proprietary, I think it was called Wizu software, where we then joined remotely from our studio. So I joined the competition with three other teammates, and one of them was a junior rider. He was back then only 17 years old. And during his race, because obviously we are racing different categories, I was doing the men's elite. During his juniors race, he actually came in first. And then we saw the entire broadcast where the people were going on the podium in Taiwan because they were there. And the champion spot was missing because that rider was in Singapore in our studio. And I think at that moment that I don't know whether have you felt it before, but that moment was something that money can never buy. And that was when I realized that wow, this felt really good. I want to do it again. And I think this and a lot of the people in Singapore, to be honest, especially the youth, they want to do their country proud and they want to represent Singapore. So I think that's my motivation. I think I'm doing more for the people, I guess. I won't say, okay, maybe I might be altruistic or I might be naive, but I hope that I can go as far as I can be to keep that passion going. But I think to answer your question, Chris, earlier, that moment actually sparked that fire within me and that started everything.
Well, do you know, I just think I want to leave it there, Chris. Do you agree?
I think it's
just
a
a beautiful
great
place to leave the conversation. It really, really is. Do you know, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you today. So you can subscribe to the Virtual Velo podcast on your favourite podcast provider and, of course, on YouTube. You can follow me, Emma Martin, on Instagram at biking_Emma and Chris at the Zimmunique. And, of course, head over to Virtual Cycling Singapore on all of their social media as well, because it's a great story to follow. You can catch me putting words to the action this weekend on the My Wish Sunday Race Club. And you can head over to thezimmunique.com and please become a member of the Escape Collective to join the conversation and support independent cycling esports journalism. We will, indeed, as ever, have more interesting guests from the world of cycling esports joining us soon. Thank you to Yi Jun for sharing his vision and to you
Maybe one last thing.
listening.
Emma, if you don't mind, I think I just want to have this shout out before I forget about it. I think to all the listeners who are listening on this, if you would like to have a cross-country collaboration or competition, you could be from, let's say, France. You could be from, let's say, Portugal. I think it doesn't matter. If you would like to host a competition, feel free to reach out to me, either directly or through Emma or Chris. I think we would love to see that happen. So yeah, I hope I get some shout outs after this podcast is being launched.
Brilliant. I hope so too. I really do. And I'll tell you something, actually. I think, and I would love to get you to get more shouts out and more people getting in contact with you, not just about an country competition, but in terms of support of more of the work that you're doing as well. And I'd love people to start to run with some of your ideas as well, because, it's a fabulous initiative. It really, really is. Well, just to finish off today, as ever, Chris will remind you to please take care of your heart. Get a coronary artery calcium scan. As always, enjoy your riding. Stay safe till we see you again. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.